Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where icy waters stretch endlessly beneath a sky painted in pale hues of dawn, and the silent, mysterious depths hold stories older than time itself. You trudge through snow-crusted tundra, the cold nipping at your nose as the whisper of the Arctic wind tells tales of a goddess who rules the sea below the enigmatic Sedna. You probably won't survive this deep dive into myth without feeling the chill seep into your bones. But hey, that's part of the fun. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fascinating to see who's awake for these stories around the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your day at the edge of the world, where icebergs drift lazily in cold waters, and the sky blurs between night and day. This is Sedna's realm, the vast Arctic Ocean where the Inuit people have lived in delicate balance with nature for thousands of years. The sea is both a giver and taker of life here. It provides the seals, fish, and whales that sustain the communities, yet it holds dangers lurking beneath its surface. Sedna is the goddess of this underwater kingdom, a figure both revered and feared. The name Sedna is relatively modern. Older tales call her by different names, but she is almost always the powerful mistress of marine animals. Her story is woven into the fabric of Inuit culture, explaining not just the bounty of the sea, but also its occasional cruelty. Imagine the soft crash of waves against ice, the crisp salt air, and the distant calls of seabirds. Sedna's story is born in this harsh yet beautiful environment, reflecting the respect and awe the Inuit have for the natural world. You can almost feel the cold water licking at your feet as you prepare to dive into this tale. Historians still argue whether Sedna's myth evolved primarily as a way to explain natural phenomena or as a moral tale about respect and balance. But one thing is clear: her story has endured the freezing winds of time, passed down through generations as a beacon of cultural identity. And by the way, if you think this is just another bedtime story, remember that the Inuit people depend on Sedna's favor for their very survival. So keep your voice low and your mind open. This is not a tale for the faint-hearted. You wake to the soft blue-gray light filtering through a thin veil of Arctic mist, and the crunch of snow underfoot becomes the soundtrack of your early morning. The village stirs slowly, wrapped in fur and smoke from small fires, a world knitted tightly by survival and ancient tradition. You follow the faint trail leading toward the shoreline, where the sea breathes quietly beneath its icy coat. Sedna's story begins not in the sea, but on land, with a young woman named Nuliayuk, or as some elders tell it, Arnaquaksak. Names change across Inuit communities, but the essence of her tale remains hauntingly consistent. She was no ordinary girl. There was something otherworldly in her gaze, a certain wildness that matched the endless, untamed Arctic horizon. One day, Sedna's father marries her off to a mysterious stranger, sometimes described as a bird spirit or a powerful hunter. The union is fraught with unease and suspicion. This stranger, unlike the familiar faces of the village, seems foreign, aloof, almost part of the natural elements themselves. As you listen to this, you might picture the flicker of firelight casting shadows on snowy walls, the elders' voices weaving the narrative like a cold breeze carrying whispered secrets. Quirkily, some versions of the myth have Sedna's fingers or even her entire hands cut off, a gruesome detail that's both symbolic and puzzling. The loss of her fingers marks her transformation from mortal to divine, the price she pays to become mistress of the sea and all its creatures. It's a striking image. Imagine trying to catch fish without fingers, forced to adapt in the most extreme way possible. Historians and anthropologists still debate the exact origin of this finger-cutting motif, Whether it's a metaphor for sacrifice, an explanation for the limits of human control over nature, or something more mysterious, some even suggest it may have connections to rites of passage or shamanistic practices long lost to time. The story reminds you that nature demands respect and that crossing certain boundaries comes with steep consequences. Sedna's journey from a vulnerable girl to a powerful goddess is marked by tragedy, resilience, and transformation themes, as chilling and profound as the icy waters she commands. And so the early morning sky deepens, and you can almost hear the sea calling Sedna's name, a soft, mournful song carried on the wind, ready to pull you deeper into her world. The sky above is a pale sheet stretching wide and silent as you trudge alongside the frozen shoreline where ice meets the endless sea. The biting cold nips at your cheeks, and the sharp scent of salt water floats on the crisp air. You can almost feel the icy fingers of the ocean curling around your ankles, reminding you of the power lying just beneath the surface. Sedna's story unfolds as a tragic betrayal. Her husband, often described as a bird spirit or a mysterious being from the sea, eventually reveals his true nature, casting her into the freezing waters. You imagine the shock, the icy plunge, the desperate fight to survive, but the story darkens here as Sedna clings to a rock or the kayak's edge, only for her father to cut off her fingers to save himself, causing her to sink beneath the waves. This grisly moment isn't just a dramatic plot twist. It serves as an explanation for the creatures of the sea. Each severed finger transforms into a sea animal, seals, whales, fish, giving birth to the ocean's bounty. It's a vivid image, almost like the world itself is born from pain and sacrifice. Here's the quirky part. Some Inuit tales mention that Sedna's hair turns into seaweed, wrapping her submerged form in a green flowing cloak. It's like nature's gentle embrace, even in her downfall. You might find yourself picturing an underwater garden tended by a goddess who rules from her cold, dark palace beneath the waves. But historians still debate whether Sedna's story was originally a cautionary myth about respecting the sea's dangers, or if it was part of shamanistic initiation rites symbolizing a death and rebirth. The ambiguity keeps her legend alive and mysterious, like the sea itself. As you absorb the story, you're drawn into the chilling paradox of Sedna's fate, from victim to sovereign, from mortal to deity. She becomes the keeper of marine life, the one who controls the food supply for the Inuit people, generous if appeased, wrathful if ignored. You step back from the shore, hearing the faint echo of waves and the ghostly call of seabirds. The ocean's secrets feel just a little closer now, and Sedna's story, dark and mesmerizing, pulls you deeper into the timeless rhythm of survival and reverence. You rise with the dawn, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges that seem to promise a quiet day. But the sea remains restless, its surface flickering with light like scattered diamonds. This morning, your thoughts drift to Sedna's underwater kingdom, dark, mysterious, and strangely alive. Sedna's palace beneath the waves is no ordinary place. Imagine a cavernous realm carved from ice and coral, where the shadows dance and the ocean's creatures gather. The Inuit describe it as a realm both beautiful and eerie, ruled by a goddess who is both nurturing and terrifying. You probably won't survive this, but here's the quirky bit. Some stories say that Sedna's hair grows endlessly, tangling and twisting around her, sometimes trapping the spirits of the sea. It's as if her long locks are both her prison and her power, linking her to every fish, seal, and whale swimming nearby. Historians still argue whether Sedna was originally a shamanic figure embodying the connection between humans and the ocean, or if her tale evolved as a way to explain the unpredictable and often cruel Arctic environment. Maybe she's both the queen of the sea and a symbol of humanity's fragile relationship with nature. As you imagine the cold, silent depths where Sedna lives, you feel the weight of responsibility the Inuit place on her. Hunters and fishermen don't just see her as a myth. She's the gatekeeper of life's essentials, They offer prayer songs and sometimes sacrifices to appease her, hoping to ensure a bountiful catch. The strange blend of reverence and fear that surrounds Sedna's story is a reminder of how people make sense of the natural world. In this harsh, frozen landscape, the sea is both a giver and a taker, and Sedna embodies that delicate balance. You shiver partly from the cold, partly from the lingering awe her story inspires. The sun climbs higher, and with it the quiet hum of life begins again along the icy coast. The wind off the ocean cuts across your cheeks as you wander closer to the shoreline, snow crunching quietly beneath your boots. There's a stillness to this moment broken only by the distant cries of seabirds and the gentle lapping of icy waves. You pause for a while, breathing it all in brine frost and the faint musk of seal oil from a camp nearby. This is the world that shaped Sedna's legend, and like most good myths, it all begins with family. Before she became ruler of the sea, Sedna was just a girl, sometimes mortal, sometimes divine, depending on who's telling the story. Her father, often named Anguta, plays a crucial role. Think of him as a sort of cosmic dad with deeply questionable parenting skills. He's the one who either betrays her outright or makes the mistake of trusting the wrong suitor. Either way, it's not going to end with a cozy father-daughter fishing trip. You probably won't survive this version, but in one telling, Sedna refuses to marry. She's picky, sure, but also stubborn, proud, and perfectly happy without a husband, which in many older cultures translates to definitely a problem. Her father, frustrated by her independence, forces her to marry a mysterious stranger. Spoiler alert, the guy turns out to be a bird spirit in disguise, which is the stuff of literal nightmares if you're not into feathers. Historians still argue whether this story is a cautionary tale for rebellious daughters or a symbolic explanation of seasonal hardship. Either way, you can feel the tension rise. Sedna, trapped in a marriage with a creature she didn't choose, cries out to her father to rescue her, so he does, sort of. He takes her into his kayak and paddles them both away. You'd think this might be the beginning of a happy reunion. It's not. As the bird husband follows furious and storm-summoning Anguta does the unthinkable to save himself, he tosses his own daughter overboard. You flinch a little, even though you're just listening. The cold water swallows her, but Sedna claws at the sides of the boat, desperate to survive. Her fingers grip the edge, and here comes the detail you'll remember in your dreams. Her father chops off each of her fingers one by one as she clings. Each severed finger sinks into the sea, transforming into a different marine animal, seal, walrus, whale. And Sedna, betrayed and broken, sinks beneath the waves, becoming something far more powerful than anyone expected. It's a brutal transition, but also a rebirth. Quirky aside, some Inuit versions describe her as growing immense, with hair that tangles the currents and eyes that pierce through fog. Others say she prefers solitude, sulking at the ocean floor like a teenager grounded for eternity. You can't help but feel for her, cast aside by both lover and parent, abandoned and then reborn as the very force that now determines who eats and who starves. It's dramatic, yes, but rooted in something deeply real. In a land where survival depends on the sea's mercy, Sedna's mood matters more than the weather forecast. As you turn back from the shore, that cold breeze trailing behind you like a whisper, you understand something ancient and silent here. Myths aren't just stories. They're survival guides dressed in metaphor. And Sedna's is the ultimate cautionary tale wrapped in ice. Your breath fogs gently in the morning light as you press forward, deeper into the heart of this frostbitten tale. The ground is harder here, wind slicing across drifts of snow with the precision of a blade. But you're not alone. In every gust, every sudden silence, there's the sense that Sedna is near, watching, maybe brooding, definitely not doing customer service. Now that she's become the goddess of the sea, Sedna isn't exactly throwing welcome parties. Her transformation gives her dominion over all marine life, the seals, the walruses, the whales. Remember those finger animals, they're not just symbolic. In Inuit belief, Sedna quite literally owns the ocean's bounty, which means if you're hoping for a successful hunt, you'd better keep her happy. Here's where things get weirdly domestic. Despite her epic betrayal and undersea exile, Sedna still cares about order. She wants her hair combed. Yes, hair maintenance is now sacred. Inuit shamans, known as angakuk, are tasked with traveling in spirit to comb her tangled locks, usually because humanity has once again ticked her off. Miss a ritual, disrespect a kill, or just forget to say thank you, that fish you were counting on might mysteriously vanish from the waters. Historians still argue whether the hair-combing tradition is a metaphor for setting the world right again, or a leftover from earlier fertility goddess archetypes. Either way, it's one of those details that sits at the intersection of the spiritual and the surprisingly specific. Also, imagine being the shaman whose eternal job is brushing some supernatural lady's seaweed-tangled hair while apologizing on behalf of all mankind. Definitely not the glamour gig you sign up for in spirit school. But Sedna's wrath isn't always volcanic. Sometimes she just withdraws, going silent and deep. In those moments, entire communities are left to interpret her mood like a giant emotional weather system. Did we upset her? Was it the whale we didn't share? Or the pollution? Or maybe someone skipped a ritual again? If you've ever had a moody roommate, imagine that, except the roommate controls your dinner and the safety of your entire village. The sea, after all, is unpredictable. One moment glassy, calm, the next howling with rage. Sedna mirrors that perfectly. She's not a benevolent provider, but she's not pure vengeance either. She's balance. Her story forces a kind of humility, acknowledging that humans don't dominate nature here. They negotiate with it, they appease it, they cross their fingers and send out offerings in the form of whispered chants and seal blubber. Quirky tidbits, some oral traditions suggest Sedna keeps a collection of bones on her seafloor throne, not creepy at all, just symbolic. Each bone represents a broken promise or offense made by humankind. Think of it like a celestial grievance pile, and guess what yours might be on there if you didn't recycle today. You pause for a moment in your mind, picturing Sedna's underwater realm. Not Atlantis, not glittering coral palaces, but something raw, organic, shifting, cold, an icy chamber where bones rattle and sea creatures flit by like the memories of better days. She's not evil, but she is fed up. And when you've been betrayed by literally everyone who could blame you, by now you've probably figured out that this isn't the feel-good bedtime story of your childhood, but there's something powerful in that. Sedna doesn't just endure, she adapts. She rises. She becomes the embodiment of nature's unrelenting logic. If you disrespect what sustains you, don't expect it to nourish you in return. As the wind dies down, you hear only the soft crunch of your steps and the far-off hush of waves. Somewhere far below, Sedna curls in her watery realm, her long hair drifting like kelp, her fingers once taken reborn in every fin, every tusk, every flicker of life beneath the sea. The chill presses deeper into your bones now, but you keep moving, trudging across an invisible border where myth turns into ritual and back again. Sedna's story may be wrapped in supernatural currents, but the ripples it sends through daily Inuit life are very much grounded, revered, repeated-lived. Her legend isn't some ancient bedtime tale. It's a living framework, a user's manual for how to interact with a force as awe-inspiring and moody as the Arctic Ocean. So let's talk ceremony and guilt offerings and how entire communities shape their actions around appeasing a woman who, let's be honest, has had the worst family dinner experience in the history of dinner experiences. Each year, especially during times of struggle, poor hunting, unusual weather, mysterious illness, Inuit shamans perform Sedna-placating rituals. These aren't dramatic fire dances or thunderous incantations. Often it's quiet, rhythmic, a drum beat, a chant in the old language, an offering of fat or sinew left out by the water's edge. It's all deeply intentional. You don't want to get it wrong because historians still argue whether the tiniest slip in ritual was believed to trigger entire seasons of scarcity. One missed syllable, one impure hand, and boom, no walrus this winter. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Some versions of Sedna's myth say she's ticklish. Yep, ticklish, a goddess who can summon tidal waves, and also might giggle if you brush her feet. This detail doesn't always make it into the scholarly texts, but it shows up in certain oral renditions as a sign that beneath her fierce veneer, Sedna is still emotionally accessible. Just don't assume that means she's ready to hug it out. You kneel in the frostbitten snow, now feeling the weight of centuries. The Inuit have survived in one of the planet's most unforgiving environments, not by defying nature, but by listening to it. Sedna embodies that philosophy: respect, reciprocity, and resilience. Her ceremonies are moments of reflection, but also, let's face it, calculated insurance. It's the spiritual equivalent of putting on your seatbelt before driving into a snowstorm. Sometimes an angakuk, the community's spiritual mediator, will claim to journey into Sedna's underwater world in trance. Their body stays behind still as driftwood, but their spirit travels downward into the depths. There they comb her hair, soothe her pain, beg forgiveness on behalf of everyone who might have hunted too greedily or wasted too much. It's a lonely mission. You're not going down there with a crowd, just a drumbeat and a pocket full of regrets. And yet the stakes are high. If Sedna is comforted, the ocean becomes generous. Seals return. The ice stabilizes. You eat. But if she remains tangled hair uncombed, rage unchecked, then the silence spreads. Fish disappear. The hunt becomes futile. The dogs whine with hunger. It's a fascinating worldview that harmony with the universe begins at the bottom of the sea, with the emotional needs of a wronged goddess. Not thunderbolts, not fire and brimstone, hair care, emotional labor, apologies, the basics. Mainstream historians do agree on one thing. These rituals likely helped communities feel a sense of agency in a chaotic natural world. If your survival depends on something as fickle as ocean ice, you need rituals that let you feel seen by the elements. Sedna gave the Arctic a face: complicated, wounded, powerful, and in return she demanded mindfulness. If that's not cosmic accountability, I don't know what is. And here's the kicker. Sedna doesn't speak. Not in most tellings. She's a silent deity. Her anger is felt, not heard. Her forgiveness is guessed at. Some elders believe she chooses silence to emphasize listening, the kind of listening that can hear a seal slipping through black water, or a shift in the wind that says a blizzard's coming. You don't talk over Sedna. You tune in. You pause again. The wind's picked up slightly, but it's not sharp anymore. It's rounded, muffled, almost like breath beneath a heavy quilt of snow. Somewhere behind your closed eyes, Sedna is being approached by another shaman, drum beating softly like a second heart, hair long and wild, ready for combing, rage patient but simmering. The world hangs in the balance as it always has. You press onward, the landscape around you dimming to a soft watercolor of ice and mist. There's a rhythm now, your steps, your breath, the heartbeat of the myth pulsing through the snow. Sedna's story, you're realizing, isn't a one-time epic with a neat ending. It's a cycle, a loop, one you keep walking even in dreams. Now let's talk about the other side of Sedna's world, her influence beyond myth in the daily grind of Inuit survival. This isn't just about combing goddess hair or offering blubber on ceremonial rocks. It's about how belief integrates with behavior, how an entire culture bakes divine accountability into its decision-making process. If you disrespect the animal you just hunted, say, by not using every part of it, or by tossing scraps into the sea without care, you might offend Sedna. And by offend, we're not talking a mild eye roll. We're talking stormy seas, blocked ice channels, empty nets. Actions have cosmic consequences here. It's kind of like living in a neighborhood run by an HOA, but the association president is a sea goddess, with a memory like an orca, and no tolerance for nonsense. Mainstream historians consider this worldview a brilliant cultural mechanism for conservation. In a place where resources are limited and life teeters on a frozen edge, teaching children that everything is sacred means nothing gets wasted. Sedna doesn't just rule the sea, she rules behavior. She keeps people humble. She's the divine version of your grandma saying, "Finish your plate, there are spirits watching." Fringe researchers, though, take it even further. Some propose that Sedna represents not a singular entity, but a composite figure born from multiple regional sea spirits combined over time into one symbolic powerhouse. Kind of like an ancient mythological crossover episode. Whether that's true or not, it's fascinating to see how fluid oral tradition can be, especially when passed from voice to voice across ice and time. And still the story evolves. In some tellings, Sedna isn't merely a sea goddess, she's a weather goddess too. Her moods affect the wind, her grief causes sea ice to fracture, her forgiveness coaxes calm. You start to realize Sedna is not a myth. Apart from the environment, she is the environment. When the ocean hurls frozen spray into your face, it's not random, it's personal. Maybe you didn't say thank you to the seal spirit. Maybe someone upstream forgot to share their catch. Maybe Sedna's just tired of your nonsense. Quirky tidbit for you: in some communities, young children are told that if they misbehave, Sedna will appear in the cracks of the sea ice and pull them down by their feet, which is essentially the Arctic version of better eat your veggies, or the bogeyman gets you, except the bogeyman is divine aquatic and still hasn't fully processed her abandonment issues. The morality baked into Sedna's legend is subtle but persistent. It's not about good versus evil. It's about responsibility. If you take from nature, you give back. If you wound something, you mend it. If you forget that balance, the consequences ripple outward. Historians still argue whether Sedna was originally a localized spirit who only gained prominence once coastal communities needed a shared framework for explaining unpredictable climate patterns. Think of her like a mythological Wi-Fi signal, once strong enough it extended across Arctic regions, helping people feel connected through shared story and ritual. You crouch for a moment in the snowdrift, the cold numbing your fingertips. Behind your eyelids, you picture a hunter long ago, slicing into seal hide with reverent hands. His breath fogs. He murmurs a prayer to Sedna, not because he thinks she's watching through binoculars, but because he knows she's present in the act, in the muscle, the blood, the frost. Respect here isn't optional, it's survival, and Sedna doesn't forget. The cold is quieter now, less like a bite, more like a blanket that's just a bit too honest. It wraps around your legs as you walk, and the snow crunches beneath your boots in that slow, satisfying way that sounds like memory. Up ahead, Sedna's world stretches further wider, icy, vast, and echoing with story. Let's slide a little deeper into her realm, literally. Beneath the frozen ocean is where Sedna resides, and trust me, she's not renting a cozy beachfront cottage with scallop trim. Her domain is the deep, the dark, the underwater silence, so thick it hums. According to traditional Inuit cosmology, Sedna lives at the bottom of the sea, in a shadowy world of swirling currents and drifting bones. Her fingers, severed by betrayal, remember, transformed into marine animals, seals, walruses, whales. The ocean's pantry, basically. You eat because of her. You fish because of her. And yes, you breathe easier when she's calm. This is where the Angakuit, the spiritual mediators, come back into focus. When times are hard, it's their job to descend, not physically but spiritually, into Sedna's abyss. Not exactly your average workplace assignment. There's no elevator, just trance drumbeats and possibly a few accidental spirit detours if you're not careful. While down there, the Angakuk must face Sedna directly, and here's where things get awkward, because she's often depicted as tangled angry. And here comes the quirky bit again, desperately in need of a hair brushing. That's right, it's not some grand offering of gold or incense that soothes her, it's grooming. Think of it as a mythical spa treatment with high emotional stakes. This part of the ritual is rich with symbolism. Combing Sedna's hair isn't just a kindness, it's an apology. It says, we know, we remember, we're sorry. The tangles are metaphors knotted by sins, disrespect, and the inevitable clumsiness of living in a world where survival and sacrifice are tangled too. Smooth her hair and you smooth the sea. Tidy her locks and the animals might return. That's the trade. Historians still argue whether this ritual journey was more metaphorical than literal, whether the Angakuk truly believed in a descent or used it as a narrative frame for psychological and social healing. But either way, the results mattered. The community watched, waited, hoped. If Sedna was appeased, life flowed easier. If not, well, someone probably forgot to bring the good comb. In more fringe renditions of the myth, Sedna's underwater home is filled with spirits of sea creatures, some friendly, some decidedly not. You're not just brushing hair in an empty room. You're navigating a royal court of marine ghosts. Imagine underwater parliament, but with fins and eternal judgment. No pressure. You walk on, imagining it now, the darkness under the ice. The way the water shifts color as light disappears. The way sound changes, softens, muffles, until even your thoughts feel like they're echoing. In the middle of that Sedna waits half woman, half goddess, whole fury. What's remarkable is how enduring this image is. Generations have carried it forward not in stone carvings or dusty scrolls, but through voices. Grandparents to children, whispered by firelight, or shared over seal soup, each telling slightly different, adapted to the teller's rhythm. But the core remains Sedna at the bottom of the sea, her fingers gone, her grief vast, and her power absolute. It's not flashy mythology. There are no 12 labors or lightning bolts here. It's quiet, intimate, but it stays with you because who hasn't felt like Sedna, sometimes betrayed, changed, powerful in strange, sad ways? Who hasn't needed someone just once to reach through the mess and untangle things? You stop walking now, not because the story ends here, but because something tells you this place, this quiet between waves, is where so much of it begins. The cold tugs at your sleeves again, as if to remind you you're still in her domain. Sedna isn't just a relic of the past. She's a living presence in Inuit cosmology, and her reach extends beyond stories whispered over snow. If you were an Angakuk centuries ago, you didn't just believe in her, you negotiated with her. You mediated between your starving community and the underwater deity with tangled hair and emotional baggage. And now let's talk about those negotiations. They weren't always successful. Sometimes, despite best efforts, metaphysical deep-sea journeys. Ritual drumming, spiritual diplomacy, Sedna didn't relent. The sea animals stayed hidden, the ice stayed thick, and the people went hungry. This wasn't a punishment as much as a pattern, the natural world behaving in alignment with the spiritual world and vice versa. You get what you give, even if what you're giving is really, really nervous hair combing. There's something strangely modern about this system. No monolithic rules, no thunderous commands from on high, just a web of cause and effect wrapped in layers of ice and lore. Sedna didn't punish out of spite. She withdrew because she'd been hurt. And unless you made the effort to understand her pain, really understand it, you wouldn't be catching a single fish. Historians still argue whether Sedna's myth evolved from real-life climate hardship, a way for early Inuit communities to interpret environmental disaster as emotional distance from a divine maternal figure. It's a tidy metaphor. Bad ice year. Someone must have upset Sedna. Low seal populations, better send the shaman to apologize. But then again, myths don't need to justify themselves to academics. They just need to work. And oh, this one works, because it isn't only about reverence, it's about accountability. You want to live here in this harsh, stunning, frozen place. You don't get to do it alone. Every creature you hunt, every storm you weather, every story you pass on is part of the deal. And Sedna, she's the keeper of that deal, queen of it really, not with a crown but with a gaze as cold as the deep sea and a silence that speaks louder than thunder. In some variations, Sedna doesn't forgive quickly, or ever. You can offer her gifts, tallow lamps, charms carved from bone whale blubber on tiny plates, but if she's still feeling wounded, she'll ignore them like a diva whose rider was disrespected. The point isn't bribery. The point is sincerity. If your community's wronged her, you need to mean your apology. And that might mean telling uncomfortable truths. Imagine it, the entire village knows the hunt failed. People are hungry. The Angakuk kneels in the center of the Kagik, the communal snow house used for spiritual rituals. The drumbeat begins low, rhythmic enough to vibrate your ribs. The lights flicker, not from electricity obviously, but from the way the flame in the seal oil lamp sways in the draft. The Angakuk's breath slows, their eyelids flutter, and then, with practiced ease, they slip away from here. Not physically. They're still kneeling, still breathing in this world, but their spirit, it moves downward, through dream and myth and story, through layers of ice and shadow, down to Sedna. You've probably guessed it by now, but this isn't just for show. These rituals were real. They functioned as therapy, drama, politics, and prayer all rolled into one. They allowed people to process grief, take collective responsibility, and most importantly, create hope. Because when the Angakuk returns, eyes opening with the softest gasp, and says, "She has forgiven us well," you can almost hear the ice shift, almost feel the seal's breath under the snow. One fringe element in later tellings adds that Sedna sometimes tests the sincerity of her visitors by sending illusions, phantom animals, whispers from drowned voices, even false versions of herself. Fail the test and you come back empty-handed. Pass and you're met with a sea alive again. It's an eerie image, isn't it? Your spirit surrounded by trickery in a world that's already mythic. But you press forward, you see the tangles, you reach out your hand. Because that's what this story is. Not a warning, not quite a tragedy, though. It has those parts. It's a ritual in narrative form, a reminder that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it cries, sometimes it waits, sometimes it just wants its hair brushed, and someone to say, "We see you." And now, as your boots creak across packed snow, you feel that too. The reverence, the quietness, the intimacy of myth. You're not just walking through a story, you're holding it like breath in cold airs. The sea is quieter now, or maybe it's just that your ears have adjusted to the hush that surrounds Sedna's story, a hush that stretches across centuries, across drifting glaciers and ink-dark waters where silence isn't emptiness, it's reverence. Tonight Sedna sits at the bottom of the sea, as always, but her image keeps shifting. That's something historians still argue about, how her myth evolved across regions, dialects, and generations. Some versions make her terrifying, part woman, part beast, tangled hair, trailing like kelp. Others soften her into a misunderstood girl, caught in a cosmic custody battle between land and sea. Either way, she doesn't stay still. Her tale flows like the tide, sometimes calm, sometimes full of teeth. The Greenlandic versions, for instance, whisper her name as Arnaquagsak. Different name, same raw ache underneath. Over in Alaska, she appears as Narevik or Nuliajuk, depending on the coastal stretch. But her essence remains a woman cast into the ocean, transformed into a force so powerful even the fish blink nervously when she shifts. You walk now along a memory coastline, not sand, but hard-packed snow glittering under faint auroras. Each crunch beneath your boot feels like stepping on something sacred, not because it's precious, but because it's endured. And endurance is kind of Sedna's whole vibe, isn't it? You pause beside a carved soapstone figure, some long-gone artist's take on her. She's half submerged, her fingers short, maybe broken, maybe bitten eyes closed in sleep or sorrow. The detail is worn down by time and weather, but the emotion still clings. It always does. Let's talk about that missing fingers thing for a second. The story changes depending on who's telling it, but one detail sticks. Sedna's fingers become sea creatures, not metaphorically, literally. As she drowns, her father chops off her grasping hands, or they're pulled off by the current, or she sacrifices them to save herself. And each severed digit becomes something vital, a seal, a walrus, a whale. You know your standard body part to biodiversity transformation. Here's your quirky tidbit of the hour in one regional variant. Her thumb turns into the narwhal, which makes sense, really. It's the most dramatic finger, obviously, so it deserves the animal with the unicorn horn. But that gruesome metamorphosis, it isn't just for shock value, it's a creation myth. Yes, but also an ecological reminder. Every bite you take from the ocean, that's Sedna's body, her sacrifice. You don't just owe her respect, you owe her a clean conscience. Which brings us to something deeply modern, the moral undercurrent. The Inuit didn't view nature as a resource. It was a relationship, a fragile, moody, but deeply intimate one, and Sedna was the centerpiece. If the animals weren't appearing, maybe the people had grown careless. Maybe they'd broken taboos, spoken names that should stay silent, spilled blood in the wrong season, ignored elders who'd warned not to overhunt. That's right, no overfishing in the ancient Arctic, thank you very much. Because if you took too much, Sedna would know, and she would not be amused. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? Today we argue about quotas and conservation zones, but the Inuit already had a divine system of checks and balances. No spreadsheets, just spirit. Now you drift along a sea path that doesn't quite exist, somewhere between story and sleep. The waves roll in not with sound, but with memory, and every so often you catch a glimmer of her, Sedna's hair rising like seagrass, her eyes watching from the deep, not malevolent, just ancient. Exhausted, maybe. Patient, definitely. You know, some versions say she's lonely, that all she really wants is company. Not the company of humans with their messy rituals and clumsy apologies, but kinship, a presence, a shared silence beneath the waves. So the Angakuk comes. The shaman enters her domain not to fix, not to conquer, but to sit. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes all Sedna needs is a witness. Other times, well, you better bring the comb. And that comb is symbolic too. Think about it. You're brushing the hair of a goddess who was wronged, cast away, transformed. You're not just detangling saltwater knots. You're untangling history, regret, trauma. You're saying without words, I acknowledge what happened to you. I acknowledge what we did. That's heavy for a bedtime story, but hey, so is freezing to death on an ice floe. Perspective. Now you're back above water, or maybe just closer to the surface. The stars wheel overhead. Somewhere far away, a polar bear coughs. Somewhere even farther, a child hears this story for the first time and tries to picture what her underwater palace might look like. Shell chandeliers, coral rugs. Or maybe it's just dark, vast, and quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't lonely, just still. You lean into that quiet now. Let the waves slow. Let Sedna rest. She'll be there tomorrow and the next day and the next 1,000 years. That's what goddesses do. They wait, they endure, they remind us that every story worth telling has a little pain, a little transformation, and a whole lot of mystery. And sometimes, just sometimes, they teach us how to listen. Snowflakes drift across your cheeks now, catching in your lashes like tiny frozen commas in a sentence you're still reading. You're deep in the rhythm of the north, slow, thoughtful, unhurried. The sea has quieted, the air has settled, but Sedna's presence pulses just beneath it all like a heartbeat. You feel more than here. The myth doesn't stop with her transformation. Because once Sedna becomes the goddess of the sea, she doesn't just sit around sulking in her kelp recliner. She rules, not with thunderbolts or wrath, but with scarcity and abundance. Her moods manifest in tides, and ice flows in fat seals or empty harpoons. If she's content, the waters teem. If she's brooding, well, better ration your seal meat because dinner is not guaranteed. Now picture the day-to-day life of those who depended on her. Families carving ulu knives from bone-repairing fishnets with sinew, scanning the horizon for a ripple of movement, something that says she's listening. Not just a whale's shadow, but an answer. A sigh from Sedna herself, like, okay, you've behaved. You may have blubber now. There's evidence, actual archaeological evidence, that communities coordinated their hunting practices based on spiritual principles. It wasn't just about tracking migration routes. It was about harmony with the sea, with Sedna, with everything that swam beneath the ice. But then there's that lingering academic debate. Did these spiritual frameworks emerge solely from survival necessity? Or were they genuine cosmological systems? In other words, were people just spiritualizing scarcity? Or was there a deeper intuitive knowing, an ancient instinct that survival isn't only about food, but about balance? You wrap your coat tighter as the snow swirls up again, whispering half-sentences. Some might say Sedna's myth is animistic, as if that simplifies it. But let's not pretend slapping a label on it makes it less mysterious. Animism, sure, but also ecological ethics, interdependence, and an emotional intelligence that honestly beats half of modern philosophy. And yet Sedna's myth isn't trapped in the past. It breathes through time. In the 20th century, Inuit storytellers passed her legend to anthropologists, artists, even filmmakers. You can find her carved into soapstone, inked into tattoos, and whispered in lullabies. One modern sculptor even shaped her as a hybrid half-woman, half-seal hair flowing like a tide chart. He said he dreamed of her every winter, which okay, creepy, but also beautiful. Then there's Sedna in outer space. No, seriously, there's a trans-Neptunian dwarf planet discovered in 2003 that scientists named 90377 Sedna. It's this reddish, icy little celestial body that takes over 11,000 years to orbit the sun. Basically the most introverted planet ever. You can almost hear her mutter, "I'll circle back." Eventually. That naming wasn't random. Astronomers chose it because the object lies at the farthest edge of the solar system, distant and icy, just like Sedna's deep-sea home. And honestly, the poetic symmetry is hard to ignore. From the Arctic Ocean to outer space, her influence spans myth and math. Not bad for someone who got tossed off a kayak. You take a moment here, breathe in, let the cold settle in your lungs like a promise. The wind tugs your hood again, maybe just the weather, or maybe her hand. Checking in, making sure you're still listening. And here's the truth. If Sedna feels like a mystery, it's because she's meant to. She doesn't wrap herself in clarity. She wraps herself in salt and shadows. She lives in the space between breath and water, memory and myth. You can't conquer her. You can only sit quietly and honor her presence. Remember the Ungakuk, the spiritual mediator. Sometimes their trance journey was less about petitioning and more about communion, just being with Sedna in her watery dark and letting her grief speak. Not every visit ended with abundance. Sometimes it just ended with understanding. That was enough. And if you're wondering whether the modern world has made Sedna obsolete, well, consider this: climate change is hitting the Arctic faster than almost anywhere else. Ice melt, seasons shift, species vanish. And who do some Inuit activists invoke? Sedna. not as a villain, but as a mirror. Her world is hurting again, her realm out of balance, and once again we're being called to account. That's not just folklore, that's philosophy. The myth still whispers through melting permafrost and shrinking hunting seasons. She's not gone, she's waiting as ever for someone to comb her hair and say, "We see what's happening and we're sorry." So now you take a final step onto an ice shelf that creaks gently beneath your feet. Beneath it, her world churns seaweed gardens, forgotten bones, glowing jellies, and the steady thrum of her pulse. You lean down not to peer in, but to listen, and maybe, just maybe, you hear her sigh. The sky above the Arctic isn't really black, more like deep shifting indigo. It's the kind of color you'd call blue in a paint store and then regret when it dries too dark in your living room. But up here it works. It blends seamlessly with the ice below, like Sedna's cloak pulling tight across the world. You walk on your steps, muffled your breath a visible rhythm. In some versions of Sedna's myth, the story doesn't stop with her becoming the goddess of the sea. It grows, morphs, expands like frost patterns on glass. There are tales where Sedna takes on multiple forms. Some say she can swim silently among whales, her long fingers combing through the dark. Others claim she appears to lost travelers as a raven watching from the windswept cliffs, waiting for someone to recognize her eyes. It's said that Sedna, in her grief and fury, becomes indifferent to the human world until someone performs the proper rituals. One of those rituals, combing her tangled hair. Yeah, if you're just tuning in, you've got to spiritually detangle the divine locks of a sea goddess if you want the seal hunt to go well. It's weirdly beautiful, and yes, deeply symbolic. Historians still argue whether this combing was metaphorical, meant to represent untangling emotional burdens, or if it was literal, performed with carved tools in the hands of shamans mid-trance. Either way, it's a gentle act, not a violent one. That's the point. You don't yell at Sedna. You soothe her, you restore her dignity. It's empathy as cosmic maintenance. And oh, the hair, long, black, unruly, it drapes across her face like seaweed, and each knot tells a story. A storm where hunters were lost, a child who sang to the tide, a broken taboo, a forgotten promise. Sedna's hair is history and memory, and you're the one holding the comb now, your hands trembling with cold and respect. The ritual, of course, isn't done lightly. There are taboos to observe, silence to keep. Not just anyone can approach her. In some oral traditions, even the Angakuk must fast beforehand, sleep alone, avoid eye contact with others. It's like setting your spiritual Wi-Fi to do not disturb. One wrong step and the line to the undersea goddess gets cut. No blessings, no blubber, no fish. But once the connection is made, the Angakuk descends. Not literally, not in a submarine or anything. This is the kind of descent that happens with smoke chanting and slow rhythmic drumming. The beat mimics the heartbeat of a sleeping earth, or a breathing sea, or maybe just your own, slowed to the rhythm of 1,000 snowy winters. In trance, the shaman journeys to the bottom of the ocean where Sedna lives. Some say it's a cavern, others say it's a palace made of whale bones and glowing shells. But they all agree it's a sacred, somber space, not scary, just vast, quiet, like the inside of a thought. And then she's there, watching. Her eyes unreadable, her fingers long, her silence heavy with unshed storms. You bow, or whatever version of bowing works, when your body is spirit stretched across realities. And you begin to comb, gently, patiently. You untangle centuries of neglect strand by salt-stiffened strand. And here's the weird part. The more you comb, the calmer the sea becomes above. Back in the waking world, the wind slows, the waves hush, fish appear, hunters rejoice. And yet you're still down there listening to the slow exhale of a goddess. Some anthropologists suggest this myth served as a behavioral guide. Basically, be respectful or the food runs out. And honestly, that makes sense. But others argue it goes deeper, that this myth carries Inuit concepts of reciprocity, responsibility, and the belief that every action, no matter how small, has spiritual consequence. Like the butterfly effect, but with seal whiskers. You finish combing. Sedna doesn't speak, but she allows it. A nod, a blink, a softened expression, and then like steam fading from a mirror she disappears. You rise from trance. The fire crackles beside you. The hunters return with full sleds. And somewhere in the sea's deepest sleep, Sedna dreams in peace for now. But the cycle continues, always. That's part of the story's power. It's not a one-and-done myth. It's a loop. Sedna gets hurt. Sedna gets distant. People forget. The sea turns cruel. Then someone remembers. Someone listens. The hair gets combed again, and the blessings flow. You glance up now, the aurora spilling green and pink over the snow. Above you, stars blink like frozen eyes. Below you, water waits. In between, you walk somewhere between reverence and rhythm, carrying the old story like a warm stone in your pocket. Even now, Sedna stirs beneath your feet, her tangled hair drifting like kelp. Her gaze fixed on the surface, not judging, not demanding, just watching, waiting to see if you'll remember the comb. The comb still sits in your hand, carved from bone, smooth with years of use, etched with shapes that might be waves or eyes. It's hard to tell. You tuck it away not because you're finished, but because stories like this never really end. They just settle for a while like snow before another storm. Your steps crunch softly on the ice as the narrative shifts again. You blink, and the world shifts from mythic trance back to the cold clarity of the Arctic world. Or almost. There's always a little bit of Sedna left, clinging to your coat like sea spray. You feel it in the air, the pressure behind the silence, the sense that the sea remembers everything. Now let's talk about her dogs. Yes, dogs. Because if you thought Sedna's story couldn't get any more surreal, you're in for a treat. In several lesser-known versions of the myth, Sedna doesn't marry a bird spirit or a hunter. She marries a dog. Yup, a literal dog. A large talking canine who ferries her between land and sea, sometimes fathering children who become part human, part dog, and who end up populating distant islands or underground realms. Fringe detail, absolutely. But it reflects something important, how Inuit mythology blends survival, strangeness, and symbolism into one icy stew. Dogs were not just animals, they were essential for travel protection and warmth. So if Sedna married a dog, well, maybe it was a cosmic way of tying her to all things vital, or maybe it was just a really odd folktale that stuck. Historians still argue whether this dog husband was ever meant to be literal, or if it symbolized loyalty, servitude, or interdependence between human and animal. There's something kind of endearing about it, though. Sedna and her dog husband living by the sea, their children barking and swimming half paw, half fin, makes your average fairy tale couple look pretty basic, honestly. But even in these versions, things don't go smoothly. The union is disrupted, the balance undone, and Sedna is cast into the ocean yet again, because every telling circles back to her fall. The fall isn't just a plot point, it's a mythological constant. She always ends up underwater. She always becomes more than human, and the world always shifts because of it. You find yourself thinking about all the ways a goddess can take shape. In Sedna's case, she's not some distant cloud-wrapped figure throwing lightning bolts or serenading shepherds from the heavens. She's visceral, cold, tangled, angry, yes, but not unjust. She punishes imbalance. She demands accountability. That might be why she's so enduring. You don't just believe in her, you reckon with her. You work with her. You negotiate. And that dynamic, it's rare in myth. Gods typically don't wait for you to untangle their hair, but Sedna does. And over time, entire generations wove her presence into daily life. Every successful hunt, every calm sea, every newborn seal, each one was a nod from Sedna, or so people believed. The animals of the Arctic weren't just meat on the table. They were gifts, returned signs that balance had been restored for one more day. Some old hunters used to say that if you whispered to the wind on the right night, Sedna would hear you, but only if you meant it. None of that half-hearted praying. She knew the difference. One breath out of place and she'd flick her wrist and send the storm. Of course, others say that's superstition layered over oral storytelling, a way to keep people honest, humble, and connected to the natural world. It's a valid take. But then again, sometimes stories don't need defending, they just need telling. You pause at the edge of a frozen lake. The ice here is glassy, a perfect mirror. For a second you see your own face. Then just beneath it something else, a flicker of hair, a glint of eye, maybe a fish, maybe a goddess. You don't lean closer, that would be pushing your luck. Instead, you keep walking. The cold is sharpening again, not hostile, just insistent, like it wants you to remember where you are. The Arctic is not a place you conquer. It's a place that tolerates you. As you continue, another version of Sedna's myth trickles into your thoughts. One where she's not pushed into the ocean, but chooses it. Jumps, dives, escapes, and in doing so, transforms herself. That twist changes everything. If she falls, she's a victim. But if she dives, then Sedna is a revolutionary. She takes her fate in both frostbitten hands and dives into godhood. Historians still argue whether that version came later, shaped by shifting social views on autonomy and power. But it resonates, doesn't it? The idea that Sedna saw a broken world and chose to leave it behind, becoming something ancient, cold, and ungovernable. You reach a rocky outcrop overlooking the sea, black waves beneath moonlight dotted with floating ice. The wind howls low, almost like a song. And in that moment you remember something small but curious. Some Inuit elders once believed that auroras were Sedna brushing her hair across the sky. A beautiful thought. Terrifying too, if you imagine what happens when she yanks the brush too hard, but mostly beautiful. You sit just for a moment and watch the lights shimmer. You imagine Sedna far below her eyes closed, her dreams filled with whales, forgotten songs, and dog-shaped memories. Maybe she smiles, maybe she doesn't. But either way, she endures. And above her, you sit trying to make sense of an old tangled story that still somehow pulls at your heart, like tide on stone. You can feel her in the cold, not threatening, just there, present. Because Sedna doesn't go away. She waits, she watches, and every so often she rises again, curling from myth, brushing the frost from her shoulders and asking very quietly if we've remembered the comb this time. The night air wraps around you like a thick wool blanket, and you notice your breath turning to frost as you exhale slowly. The story has settled deep inside you now, like sediment beneath the ice, quiet, dense, and ancient. Sedna's tale, with all its twists and sharp edges, begins to soften as your eyelids grow heavier. The world feels larger and colder, but somehow more intimate too, as if the Arctic itself is breathing alongside you. You trudge forward through this frozen landscape, your footsteps muffled by a blanket of fresh snow. There's a calm in the quiet. No roaring engines, no blinking city lights. Just the gentle pulse of the sea beneath the ice and the whisper of a goddess, long forgotten by most but still alive in the stories passed between people huddled around fires. That's the real magic, isn't it? Not the myth itself, but the sharing of it, the way it lingers in the shadows of your mind, comforting and strange. Remember that comb, the one carved from bone, rough yet beautiful. It's more than a tool. It's a symbol of patience, endurance, and the tangled complexity of life itself. Just like Sedna's hair, your thoughts knot and unknot, unraveling with time. The ocean might be cold and dark, but it's also full of life mystery and unexpected warmth if you know where to look. Like a story told in whispers, it invites you to lean in, to listen carefully. As your body begins to relax, you can almost hear the distant song of the sea, a slow, steady rhythm that mirrors the beating of your own heart. Historians still argue whether Sedna was originally a goddess or a powerful spirit, shaped by generations of storytelling, but what matters more is what she means, a reminder of balance, respect, and the power of transformation. Now, as you settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, the wind outside fades to a soft murmur. The cold recedes, replaced by the warmth of knowing you've traveled far through myth and memory tonight. Sedna waits beneath the waves, but for now she lets you rest. You feel the quiet draw you under, the story folding in on itself like the closing of a shell. The sea is vast, the night is still, and you are exactly where you need to be, safe, warm, and drifting gently into sleep. Sweet dreams. The world around you softens as the story drifts gently away like a wave pulling back from the shore. Your breath slows, matching the steady rhythm of the sea, calm and endless beneath a vast, starry sky. The cold edges of the Arctic fade into a warm hush, the silence wrapping you like a familiar blanket. You feel the weight of the day melt away, replaced by a quiet stillness that invites your thoughts to float freely, untethered and light. Sedna's tale lingers like the last glow of dawn, subtle, beautiful, and just a little mysterious. Her story is not just about the icy depths or fierce storms, but about transformation, resilience, and the delicate balance between the human world and nature's wild heart. It reminds you that sometimes the greatest power lies in surrender, in letting go, and in trusting the ebb and flow of life itself. As your eyelids grow heavy, you sense the sea's gentle song humming beneath the surface, a soft lullaby that calls you toward rest. The myths and legends, the icy waters and frozen skies, they all blend into a quiet symphony that soothes your mind and calms your spirit. There's comfort in knowing these ancient stories continue to breathe through time like the slow, steady pulse of the tides. So now, as you settle deeper into the warmth of your bed, let yourself drift into that peaceful space between waking and dreaming. The world is vast, the night is gentle, and you are safe. Let the quiet wash over you, carrying you softly toward sleep, where new stories will wait to unfold with the dawn. Sweet dreams.